All right, we are on lesson 12, page 83. If you need to pause this video at any time so that you can get to the page or to write things down, please do. Page 83. We're going to start at the top, and we're going to be thinking about each fraction. Are they closer to 0, to 1/2, or to 1 whole? So if we had 1/3, is that closer to 0, to a half, or to a whole? Well, 1 is closer to 0 than 3. So we're going to say 1/3 would go somewhere on the number line closer to 0. We think 5/6. Half of 6 is 3. 5 is more than that. So we're going to think about that one going closer to 1/2, but after 1/2, before the 1 whole. So 5/6. 6 is half of 12. So for 7/12, that's very close to 1/2. It's only one number away. So we're going to put 7/12 closer to 1/2. Okay, so if we look on our part B, if we had a half and 7/12, we know that 7/12 is greater than a half. If we had 7/12 compared to 5/6, remember we said 3/6 is a half, and 6/12 would be a half, and 7/12 is closer to 6/12 than 5/6 is closer to 3/12. So we would say that 5/6 is greater. All right, let's turn the page. On this page, we're going to think about which fraction is greater. Some fractions you can look at 0, half, or 1 whole. We can also multiply the fractions by the opposite denominator to figure out which fraction is greater. So let me show you how to do that. If I have 1/2 and I multiply 1/2 by 4ths, which is the opposite denominator, then I would get 4/8. Now, if I take 3/4 and I multiply it by the opposite denominator, which is 2, then I get 6/8. Which one is greater, 4/8 or 6/8? We know 6/8 is greater, so we're going to show 3/4 is greater. Let's try another one. On B, we have 1/2, and we're going to times it by the opposite denominator, which is 8. So we have 8/16. Now I do the same thing to the other side. I have 7/8 times it by the opposite denominator, which is 2, and I have 14/16. So is 8/16 or 14/16 more? 14/16, so we know that 7/8 is greater. Let's look at C. We have 2/3 times it by the opposite denominator, which is 5, and we get 10/15. We do the same to our other fraction. We have 2/5 times it by the opposite denominator, which is 3, and we get 6/15. Is 10/15 or 6/15 greater? 10/15, so we know 2/3 is greater. Look at 9/10 compared to 3/5. So we say 9/10 times it by the opposite denominator, which is 5, and we have 45/50. Do the same thing with the opposite fraction. So now we have 3/5 times opposite denominator, which is 10. So we get 30/50. Is 45/50 or 30/50 greater? Well, 45, so we know 9/10 is greater. All right, let's look at the next one. We have 2/3 times by the opposite denominator, which is 8. So we have 16/24. We do the same thing with our next fraction. 7/8 times by the opposite denominator, which is 3. And we get 21/24. Is 16/24 or 21/24 greater? 21/24, so we know 7/8 would be greater. All right, let's look at F. We have 1/3, and we times it by opposite denominator, which is 4. That equals 4/12. So now we take 2/4 and times it by the opposite denominator, which is 3. And we get 6/12. Is 4/12 or 6/12 greater? 6/12, so we know 2/4 is greater. All right, we're going to do 2 more problems. Actually, we'll do 3 more problems. So we'll do 2/3 and 5/10. 2/3 times the opposite denominator, which is 10, equals 20/30. Now we take 5/10. Multiply it by the opposite denominator, which is 3. And we have 15/30. Is 20/30 or 15/30 greater? 20/30, so we know 2/3 is greater. Make sure you're writing all of this out on your paper as well, as you should be showing your work and doing it with me. So now, we have 11/12, and we're going to times it by the opposite denominator, which is 5. And we get 55/60. Now we take 2/5 times it by the opposite denominator, which is 12. And we get 24/60. Is 55/60 or 24/60 greater? So 11/12 is greater. We're going to do one more problem. On this one, we have 49/100 and 51/100. Because the denominators are the same, we do not have to multiply. All of the other problems, we had to multiply to get the denominators the same. but because these two are the same, we can just go ahead and compare. So is 49 hundredths or 51 hundredths greater? 51 hundredths. All right, you need to work on your Zern lesson for lesson 12. Please make sure that you are working everything through and watching the video. If you need to come back to this video, you can, or if you need to pause it to go back to write things in your book, you can do that too. But your paper should look like mine.